Welcome to A Walk in the Garden. I'm Liz Davey, and this show is a series that is filmed by NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable. And it's filmed in my garden here in Norfolk. And I'm standing in my herb garden, and it is the end of October, and I'm in a sweatshirt, but I could easily be in short sleeves today because we're having a warm day. It's a little in the early 70s, I'd say. And it's a beautiful day. The leaves are turned and things look really beautiful for fall. It's very late in the season to have days like this, and we've had quite a few. There's been no frost yet, not even a hint of a frost, which we often have by now, but I think it's coming. We all know, if you live in New England, you know that the frost and the snow will be coming eventually. So it's time to get ready. And one of the things I'm doing is removing my herb plant labels. I know which ones they are pretty much. I label them more for others than for myself. And I will put these away in my shed for the winter. I've also dug up a rosemary plant. Rosemary is good down to about 20 degrees, but after that, you will lose the rosemary. So I always try to bring one in. Sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not. This one will go inside probably this weekend. They are saying we could have a light frost early next week. So I'll take this in and I'm going to set it on a saucer that's filled with gravel and keep the gravel wet so that the plant gets some humidity. Lavender likes to be in a humid Mediterranean type climate. I don't have that inside my house, but we're going to try to mimic it just around the lavender plant and see if we can keep it going through the winter. Many of the herbs are still greatly usable all of the time. I've got some other plants here. Fennel. There's fennel seed and fennel foliage. Stevia, which is a sweet herb. I can dry some of that, powder it, and then use that to sweeten tea or lemonade or any other thing that I'd like to use stevia in. You could buy stevia in the store as an artificial sweetener, only it isn't artificial, it's a real sweetener. It's a very sweet tasting leaf. We have winter savory, that's always good with beans, and still a little of the sorrel, a few leaves of sorrel, a few leaves of basil, and some parsley up in that area, and a few chives. So all in all, we still have some herbs going. And of course, sage, which is a nice fall herb, and I'm drying that. That's very good dried. And the oregano too is very good dried. That's a good way to preserve it. And so I'll be drying more of that. As you can see, the leaves and the pine needles are falling rapidly, and we're trying to keep ahead of those a little bit. I'm going to leave some of the leaves in the gardens. I'll probably rake out the herb garden once, but then when the oak leaves come down, which is much later, they're still hanging on pretty tight, this area will be covered with oak leaves. And the oak leaves are a lot less likely to mat down than the maple leaves, so they make a pretty good mulch on both the herb bed and the flower bed, and they can stay until spring. Now let's move over to the perennials and see what we can do over there. Still have a few flowers in the perennial garden, but most of them have gone by. This is a Jupiterium Chocolate. It has, in the early season, leaves that are a little darker and add a nice dark accent to the garden. The leaves kind of green up or turn kind of yellow when the plant blooms with these white blooms very late in the season. In fact, sometimes if we have an early frost, we don't even see blooms. The plant in front is a Montauk daisy, and they're the daisies that you see now in bloom. The Shasta daisies and the early field daisies have all gone by, but the Montauk daisy blooms later and is a perennial. I have a few pots in here still of plants that provide some greenery, but little else right now. And they will be composted and the pots put away very soon. The goldenrod's gone by, and most of the very colorful asters. I still have one aster that I'll show you in a few minutes down here. But the next thing I want to do is do some planting. And I'm going to plant some tulips. If you saw one of my shows last spring, you'll remember that I took some rocks and I put, with acrylic paint, just some labels on them. A T for tulips, C for crocus, H for hyacinth, D for daffodil. Very simple. And then I put those in areas where I wanted to add new plants. Right now, I have no idea where all of my bulbs are planted. And these were put in when the bulbs were blooming so that I know where I need a little extra. I've got a lot of bulbs in here, but finding them in the fall is always a problem. You just can't unless you dig them up and dig into them. So this says T, so I know that I want a tulip here behind the Siberian iris, which I've already cut back. I don't cut everything back, but I do cut back my irises. And that'll be a good place to put the tulips. The iris foliage will then hide the tulip foliage as it dies down next May and June. So these are little purple tulips, and I've already dug the hole, and I want to plant them about 3 times as deep as they are long. And there's 5 in the bag, and I'm going to put 5 down in the hole. I plant them in bunches. They tell you to plant them farther apart, and if you're planting a row of them, I guess you could. But I like to just plant a close bunch so they look like a bouquet when they come up and bloom. I'm smoothing the soil back over it. And then the oak leaves that are going to fall will cover this, and it will be covered by the time they start to bloom. And I'm going to take my rock, and I'll probably use it again next year to mark where I'd like some more. If I don't have good oak leaf cover on this, I will put some straw over the spot to just give it a little extra mulch. I don't add bulb fertilizer until spring. I'll add that in the spring when the bulbs first start coming up. And we can smooth a little more of the soil over it, I think. If you have a lot of trouble with squirrels and chipmunks digging up your bulbs, you might want to put a little hot pepper in the hole along with the bulbs, either crushed hot pepper or cayenne pepper powder. And that usually does the trick in keeping them away from the bulbs. Now I'm going to move down the way. And while I'm here, this is a poppy. And it's coming up in the fall, and that's completely normal. If you've planted oriental poppies and they disappear about midsummer, I cut them back. But in the fall, they throw up some foliage. And it's perfectly normal for them to do it. The same thing with grape hyacinths. They're all over my garden at this point, and they too put up foliage in the fall. It will not interfere with their blooming next spring, and they'll either keep this foliage, depending on the weather, or put up new foliage next spring. But this is giving the roots a little extra nutrition as we go into fall. Now I'm going to move down this way, and I still have a few roses blooming. This is a knockout rose, and they just keep on blooming. I have buds up in here, a few more, and I'm going to just let them do their thing. I'm not going to bother deadheading them. I'll just keep them going as they are. A few annuals will get picked, and I'm collecting seeds. This is butterfly weed, the lovely orange milkweed that the monarchs love so much, and mine is going to seed. And I'll probably have quite a bit coming up here next year. But I can also save the seeds, so I'm just filling a bag with them and the fluff that comes with them. And there's no way I'll get all of them, but I'll get enough to share with anybody who wants to grow a little. And we could use that, we'll either plant them now or winter seed them in January or February, which is what I've done in the past. They need a period of cold to germinate, so you want to get them in the ground. You don't want to wait until next spring or summer. Behind it is my last aster to bloom. This is a native aster, and it's been light blue, and next year I want to remember to stake it. It's kind of flopped all over the place, and it would be nice if it were a nice tall but together plant instead of sprawling all over. So I need to make a note to do that. Behind it is pineapple sage, and you'll notice the red blooms on the pineapple sage. It's a shame that the hummingbirds have already migrated south because they would love it. Unfortunately, this plant blooms really late for me. You can't put it out in the garden until after the danger of frost. And not every year does it bloom, because sometimes we have an early frost and that kills the plant. It's quite tender. The leaves have a marvelous aroma of pineapple, and you can cut them up and use them in fruit salad. The leaves do not hold on to their flavor or their aroma if you cook them. So use is pretty limited to just chopping them up in probably a fruit dish of some sort. But the blooms are beautiful, and it's nice that we can see them this year because we haven't had a frost. Again, some years it doesn't bloom because frost comes too early, but I'm really enjoying them this year and wish the hummingbirds were still about to enjoy them too. Coming over this way, I have a peony, and the peonies are one thing that I do definitely cut back. I'll leave the asters because they have nice seed heads that the birds really will like. But the peonies, the foliage has gotten mildewed, and it's time to just cut them back. And these I will put into a bag and burn them or take them to the landfill. I don't want them in my compost because they are mildewed and I don't want it spread around. And a few more stalks here. This is a red herbaceous peony, and yeah, that's all there is to it. And then the support that I had on that can go back behind my potting bench for the winter. Oh, a few weeds are in here too, so we'll pull those at the same time. It's a good time to pull any weeds. You certainly don't want them to go to seed and spread more weeds around. Now, this one is a tree peony, and that one does not get cut back. It has a woodier stem, main stem, and branches off of it. We'll just let those leaves fall and leave that right where it is. So you don't have to cut back a tree peony, but the herbaceous peonies, you do need to do that. They bloom a little later than the tree peonies and are the ones that you see in a lot of older gardens. Moving down this way a little bit, we still have some chrysanthemums in bloom, and these are the ones that we did pinch back, or they would be up here. Actually, with all the water we had this summer, they still grew fairly tall, taller than I had wanted them. And I have a few chrysanthemums in the back. We still have a few annuals blooming along the edge of the perennial garden and down the way. And those will be pulled as soon as they're frosted and turn black with the frost. Also, Sedum Autumn Joy here and there with the dark red bloom heads. They start out pale pink and progress until they're a deep red. And those I can pick and use in winter decorations. Also, I have a red twig dogwood right here. It's starting to lose its leaves, and you can see the red twigs, and those too can be cut and used to good advantage in winter decorations. They look nice as a group in a planter outdoors, or even inside mixed with some flowers. So I'll be using those. It does profit from being cut back every year or two, so you're not really doing any damage by using the stems. Next month it'll be time to cover some of the things in the garden, and I've got some bushel baskets that I'll be filling with oak leaves to put over things like lavender that are more tender, and I have some of those in here. The marigolds, of course, are annuals, and they will come out as soon as they're finished. And as soon as we have a frost, the marigolds will wilt and turn black, so we know when to remove those. Other than that, most of the things will be left in the garden. I do take out the irises and also some of the grasses because I don't like to do it in the spring. That's my main reason. There's no reason I have to take them out, but I prefer to do so. It also helps me see spaces like over where I planted the tulips, where we need to put in some bulbs. But now let's head over to the vegetable garden and see what's happening over there. We're in the vegetable garden at the other end from where we've been the last few months when we've done the show. And I'm getting this area ready for winter and doing some things. Now we have, the strawberries were planted way back in April. And I planted about 25 strawberries. And as you can see, it's expanded considerably. I've had a lot of runners, and so I've got a fairly wide swath of berries that should flower next year. I removed all the blossoms this year to encourage the roots to form and the runners to form. I will be covering that with a layer of straw once the ground is pretty well frozen. This will be sometime after Thanksgiving probably, maybe even closer to the middle of December. But I want to cover them with straw at that point to protect them over the winter. We're still picking things. I have kale, arugula for salads. I have some lettuce up the way for, again, salads. And I have a few new broccoli plants. I put in some in the fall. Actually, I had started them early and never got them planted into the garden until a little later on, after I removed my old strawberries. So they were in a little late, so I'm getting some really nice heads of broccoli. Some of the best broccoli is available in the fall. It's relatively bug-free, and it just grows a little more slowly, so it doesn't go to a seed early. And I'm picking two very nice heads of broccoli. Now, these plants are not finished. I'm going to leave them here, and they will put out some side shoots. Hence the frame over them and over some of the kale as well. I have a cover that I will put on as the temperatures drop, and hopefully this will keep the broccoli and the kale going a little extra time in the garden. We'll see how long we can keep it going. The arugula will last through a frost or two, as will any broccoli that's not covered, and kale as well. I've got a lot of kale on the other side too. These are plants that are fall plants, and they'll keep going down to about 20 degrees. So that should take us almost through November, I would think. The lettuce will probably go, and certainly the flowers will. So I've really been picking my zinnias and enjoying them, because once we get a frost in here, they too will blacken and need to be removed. I also have marigolds and nasturtiums on the other side. I've taken out the tomato plants except for one plant which still has a few plum tomatoes that are ripening. And I've taken out the peppers and the eggplant and the beans because they were finished for the season. Also, you'll notice that the cucumber teepees are gone. I took those down. I just cut the strings and put the remains into a trash bag, string and all, for disposal, and put away my stakes for another year. The cucumbers had just actually fruited themselves out. I think they were finished for the year. I was not getting any more, and the foliage had gone, so it was time to take them out. I will gradually remove things as they go and compost them, or if they're diseased, definitely trash them or save them for burning. But it's time now to plant again, and this time I'm going to be planting garlic, and it's a little hard to see, but I have garlic that I harvested earlier, and I'm going to plant some of my own cloves, and I also bought some. So what I'll do is separate the cloves from the head, and this is a good one. And I've already dug a trench and put in a line, and I'm going to pop these in about finger length down. Now, I guess that depends on the size of your finger, and about 6 inches apart. I dug up this area and added some compost. And you want to put them in with the root side down and the head up. The pointy part goes up. And then cover them. That's all there is to it. Once I've planted my whole row, and I usually plant a whole row of garlic, we'll smooth them down good. Continue planting. I've got a whole box full of sets. I bought 3, and I took 3 of my own from my own harvest. And once they've been planted, I will put straw over the top to mulch them. Now, if you planted your garlic early, and I know many people planted it earlier this month or even last month, you'll find that it will come up in the fall. It won't hurt it at all. Sometimes it comes up, sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on the weather and when you planted it. But you can expect to see it next spring popping through the straw that you put over it for mulch. So that's what's going on in the vegetable garden. Raspberries are over here on the other side. They won't get any care until next spring when we'll cut some of them back and take out the canes that fruited this year, so that the new canes can support another crop next year. And of course, always planning for next year and seeing what we want to do differently. I wanted to plant the garlic here because it wasn't here last year. It was further over. You want to try to rotate your crops so that you don't have the same thing planted in the same place every year. I have 2 things that stay, perennial crops, which would be the strawberries. Actually 3, because I have some rhubarb at the other end. I have raspberries, strawberries, and rhubarb, and they stay here in a permanent location. But other than that, I can move things around in the garden. I write down a plan each year before the garden season starts, and then I know by looking at older plants where things have grown for the last 2 or 3 years, and I try to move them around so that I don't have anything in the same place. The smaller your garden, the harder it is to do this, but if you can, it's important to try to rotate a little bit. Now let's go back to the shade garden. I've got the net on the pond, and I've used an old sprinkler frame. The sprinkler itself died, but I kept the base, and this has proved it's an adjustable base, and there is a shelf in my pond, so I can make one leg shorter than the other 2 and put it in to support my net a little bit. This helps keep the leaves rolling off. It doesn't entirely keep them out of the pond eventually, but it certainly helps. And then I've fastened it down with rocks around the edge. I'll leave the skimmer and the waterfall going and the pump going as long as I can. at least until the leaves have all fallen down. And since this pond is in the shade, we have a lot of leaves to fall. Once I've cleaned the leaves up around it, and I can flip back the netting and hopefully keep most of them out of the pond. And then the skimmer will pick up any that fall in. And at that point, we can start taking out the skimmer and the waterfall and all the piping and storing it away for the winter. Once the temperatures get really cold and the pond starts to freeze, I can put in the ice melter, which is plugged in, and this will give a hole in the ice, hopefully, and keep a place for any gases that accumulate from the fish waste or organic matter that does fall in the pond. It will keep it open so that those gases can escape through the ice. Otherwise, if you get it completely iced in, you're liable to lose your fish due to these toxic gases and wastes that will collect. So you want to be able to keep a hole in the ice. The last 2 winters haven't been too bad, and the heater has not had to work real hard at all, because a lot of times the ice would be hit by the sun, which comes in once the leaves fall off the trees, and melts. It's also the cuttings that we did last month. I've got these I've been putting into the shed for the last few weeks, and they will be moving into the house again as the temperatures get colder. The shed will be good for 2 or 3 degrees to keep it from really freezing, but it doesn't stay that warm all winter. So my cuttings will come in under the lights very shortly. But I've had them out here just to keep the leaves off of them as much as anything. Otherwise they get full of leaves. The other big job will be cutting these back. This has an impatient, and it's a begonia. And I will cut this off once frost touches it a bit. And the impatiens, of course, are very tender, and they completely go once they're frosted. But this will be cut back, and then I can bring it inside and store it dry over the winter in a cool room. I have several plants like that inside my shed already. I don't want them to start growing again, so I have put them in, and again, I'll bring them into a cool room. The pineapple lilies, begonias, canna lilies, and calla lily. And those will come inside and wait until spring when I'll bring them back out, put them into a sunny room, and start watering them again. So cleaning the shed is my next thing to do. It's pretty full and pretty disorganized at the end of summer, and it has to be cleaned out so that I can store some of my patio furniture inside. Also, I'll want to put any ceramic pots inside for the winter. Plastic pots can stay out. You want to find a place for them. I use a trash can with a tight cover and put my plastic pots in that to save them for next year's use. But any ceramic or terracotta pots need to come in for the winter. If you leave them out with soil in them, it will collect water, freeze, and the pots will crack and break. So if you have some of the nice, expensive terracotta pots, you certainly want to make sure that they're either turned upside down or brought in, preferably brought in. That's the absolute best. I do have a shed to do that, so I will be getting my terracotta pots inside, as well as many other things that need to go inside. But any of the plastic pots, like the ones where the impatiens are, they can stay out for the winter just turned upside down. And they'll be out by my potting bench near the garden. Again, the impatiens will go. I have a snapdragon in this pot, which is doing pretty well. In fact, the little snapdragons that I put in my window boxes are now blooming. My window boxes have kind of come back to life. I thought everything was gone, but I have some petunias and some snapdragons that are doing pretty well. I think I'll move the snapdragons up close to my house on the south side and see if perhaps they will make it through the winter. Sometimes they do. Otherwise, the impatiens and the coleus, I've already taken my cuttings, so I won't feel quite as bad losing these plants that are in the containers because I know I have cuttings to replace them next year. Again, we will be feeding the fish. I'll give them a little bit more today because it's a warm day and the water heats up. And I've also cleaned out my bird houses, many of them that were hanging and had nests in them. I wore my mask and my gloves and cleared them out of the nesting material and stored them again in the shed. Now, several of them are mounted on areas where they can't be brought in. I have bluebird houses, and those I left open or removed the bottom panel so that we could get no mice for the season. Bluebirds come back pretty early, so you want to plan to get your bluebird houses ready early, but you also don't want to have your bluebirds come in and find it's full of mice. So I do leave the bottom out of the birdhouse or the door open, the clean out area open, so that other things won't nest there over the winter. I'm leaving my fake plastic heron out because there will be a time when there are no plants in the pond and there will be no water running or net. And hopefully the heron will be enough of an alert. They'll think that this pond has its own heron and they won't bother my fish. I also have a tile in the bottom of the pond. It's actually a flue tile, a terracotta flue tile, about this big around and about this long, and the fish can hide in it. So hopefully I will be able to save my fish from getting eaten by raccoons, herons, or any other critters that like fish. Well, there's still water in the pond and not ice. Of course, once there's ice, they can't get them that easily. So it's just continued cleanup, moving leaves around. Many of the leaves will just stay on the plants all winter. After all, nobody goes in and cleans the woods, so many of these are woodland type plants and they will do just fine if the leaves are left, and the leaves will disintegrate and form a mulch next spring. Only in areas with heavy leaf cover will I remove some of them. I'll take out the hosta plant's foliage once it yellows and browns. That will help discourage slugs from next year's crop. And I'll continue to use my deer spray. I think I probably got it right here, or perhaps it's in the garage. But I deer spray anything that they might like to nibble on. They tend to like hollies, azaleas, young rhododendrons, though not older rhododendrons, and anything else that they take a fancy to. So you kind of have to watch. If you see something being nibbled, it's probably deer if you live in Norfolk, because we have lots of them and they tend to roam and eat. They do not like the Leucothwaite shrub, which I have, and they don't like the Andromeda or mountain laurel either, so that's always good. And of course now I don't have to worry too much about hosta. They're on their way out, and they too are a deer favorite. So, but I will continue to spray until we have snowfall to keep the deer discouraged. Once they form a path, they tend to stick to it. And if you could discourage them early and continually, they tend to leave your yard alone, which is always good news. We will see them on the edges, but they don't come in the yard very often. Having a dog obviously helps too. Okay, now let's go up to the patio and see what we can cook up on a nice fall day. I'm going to talk a little bit about preserving before we start on our meal for today. And I've put washed parsley into a glass jar, and this will save in the refrigerator for a very long time. The parsley in the garden will last a long time too. And don't pull the parsley when you're doing your fall cleanup. Cover it with some straw and you'll probably get a spring flush of parsley. Parsley is a biennial. It grows foliage the first year from seed, and then the second year it will put up more foliage and then bloom and produce more seed. That's how it keeps itself going. But it will give you parsley to use in the spring before your parsley from seed is ready. So you can have parsley most of the year, especially if you, in the fall, pick some and put it in the refrigerator. I usually pick both the curled leaf and the flat leaf and put jars in the refrigerator. And as I use it, why I put in another jar until it's gone. You can pick it under the straw for a very long time until it really gets cold or is covered with snow. So parsley is one of those things that lasts in the garden really well and comes up early in the spring if you don't pull it. And a lot of people think it's finished and just pull it up and get rid of it, but it isn't finished yet for the most part. Sometimes if you bought plants, the plants would have been second-year plants, and they may have gone to seed, in which case you can pull it. But if your parsley has not gone to seed this year, it more than likely will come up again in the spring to be used. So that's one thing about the parsley. Then our flower arrangement. I wanted to use this ceramic pumpkin. Actually, I've had it for quite a long time, and it can be used as a cookie jar or just a decoration. It does have a nice ceramic lid. And I wanted to use it as a floral arrangement. But the mouth of the pumpkin is quite large, and to put flowers in, they would be flopping out the side. So I did use a canning jar, a wide mouth pint canning jar, and into the bottom of it I fit a piece of Oasis, which is the floral foam that holds water. There's Oasis, which will hold water, and Sahara, which is for dry things like dried flowers and silk flowers. They kind of make sense, Oasis and Sahara, when you think about it. The Sahara would be the one for the dry things, and the Oasis wet. But I put it in the jar, just in the bottom, because I wanted it to hold this branch, which I thought was kind of interesting. Just a kind of spooky dead branch for Halloween time. And I wanted to put that in the middle. And I knew it wouldn't stay unless I had it in something. So that holds the branch. Then there's water above the Oasis, and the flowers go into that. And some of them poke into the Oasis and some are just around it. I also used some of my red kale, picked that and used that around the edge. These are Dahlias and Zinnias from the garden. Again, I'm picking them because I know they'll be gone. To put my canning jar into the pumpkin itself, I used what is called, what do they call it here? Flora sticky clay. And this is a green clay that's sticky on both sides. You can get it at the craft stores, and that holds things together temporarily. So that holds the canning jar into the middle of the pumpkin. Just a few things that you might want to know if you want to do some flower arranging. Little helpers that help along the way. Again, these are going to go the minute we have a frost. They will be blackened, and so I feel I might as well enjoy them inside as well as outside. Now, the next thing we're going to do a little Halloween meal. I'm not into yucky Halloween food. I like food that's somewhat appetizing and not just something yucky, which cuts out some of the green eggs and other things that are tinted just for the effect. And vomiting pumpkins and that sort of thing. But I've added a little place-setting apple with a skewer, small little cocktail pick, and I've put a ghost on it. That's supposed to be a ghost. It's a Reese's ghost. They come in white Reese's at this time of year, and that's one of the candies that I got for Halloween, and thought it would be cute just poked in an apple. And I'll do a few Halloween touches on things as well. People often know that apples are the seasonal fruit of fall, but there's another seasonal fruit, and that's pears. And so we've made a salad today to go with this meal of sliced pears, goat cheese, toasted walnuts, and arugula from the garden. I'll serve that with a dressing made with cider vinegar, olive oil, and a little maple syrup. Makes for a very nice salad dressing. We're having soup for supper. This is bean soup, bean and split pea. And on that I'm going to put a spider web. And to do that, I'm going to put a spiral around on it, and then I can use the back of a spoon or just about anything to draw these out from the center to make a web. Toothpick works well too. So we have a little spider web of sour cream on top of the soup. We'll put that one on the plate. And then to serve with the soup, I'm going to make a little flatbread pizza. And these are flatbreads, and we're going to be baking this later. So I'm going to add some tomato sauce, and this is just plain spaghetti sauce, actually. It's seasoned. And I'll put some of that on each one, leave a little edge. This might appeal to any younger people you have in the house, or older people too. And then to finish it, I'm going to add some mozzarella cheese, and I'm going to add a ghost. And what I've done is used sliced mozzarella and used a cookie cutter. If you have yellow cheese, you can use a pumpkin cutter and make a pumpkin with one of your cookie cutters. For the eyes of the ghost, I just used a straw, and a straw makes great eyes on either cookies or ghosts in this case. So those will go in the oven for later, and I'm going to set those over here for now. And just until they get nice and warm and melty. Then the last thing, we need some dessert. And I made pumpkin cupcakes, and I have maple frosting. And you can make any frosting, maple frosting. This particular one was a cup of butter, a third of a cup of maple syrup, a little vanilla, and a little maple extract. And then 3 cups of confectioner's sugar. Very easy to whip up in the mixer. And it also pipes nicely, and you can use whatever tip you want. Sometimes they use cream cheese frosting on these frequently, but I thought maple might be a nice change. And then we'll add some a candy corn to each one, just to be festive. Or any other type of Halloween candy you might have that you want to add. They have also little pumpkins as well. So that's our Halloween meal. Halloween isn't for another week or so here yet, but we're all ready. And this is something you could serve for Halloween that isn't too scary. So, thanks for joining me today. I'm Liz Davey, and you've been watching A Walk in the Garden with Liz Davey on NCTV Norfolk Community Cable.